Hello and welcome to Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly chat between two friends into which we funnel our existential anxieties and need for highfalutin, idealistic, hopeful and optimistic ways we're just putting the world to rights kind of thing. You know, that sort of thing. Pub chat.
Join us.
My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Magic.
And this week on Michael and Ivanka's Pub Chat, alcohol-free pub chat, morning pub chat, we're going to talk about what's the origin of the universe. Like, Ivanka wanted to know where the universe has come from, although now she's got a book that apparently says it. So we're going to talk about the origin of the universe and talk about why creationists are wrong.
Yes. Fair enough.
We're going to address the viewpoint, some of the alternative viewpoints, as best we can.
Respectfully and with love.
With the respect they deserve. Did we say our names?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, okay. All right, a bit frazzled. Like, I hope you'll forgive us a slightly frazzled week. It's episode 101. It's kind of weird. I feel like it's psychologically, you know, 2 zeros next to each other is such a big deal for some reason. So then when you sort of start on the net, you kind of, the clock ticks onto the next one. You're like, okay, this hill is steep. Like that was just a tiny little ledge, very low down an infinite mountain. Yay! Are you, Ivanka, and how is Brighton? How has it been back in our lovely Brexit broken Britain?
It is in many ways delightful. I do love Brighton. It's a safe haven in a world of madness, but it is and the weather, everyone was telling me all about this rain, and then there's not been that much rain this week, so I don't know what they're talking about.
Is it cold there? It's 1 degree here today.
Yeah, it was quite cold. It's fresh. And I have had quite a hectic week. I have had a delicious vegan lunch Monday, straight away out there, boom, vegan lunch in the market without any, doesn't even matter that it's vegan, it's just a nice lunch, and which is what Brighton's good at. And then I have had a trustee. I've had a really busy week. Yeah. A trustees meeting. I've done a day with the fostering team at Brighton and Hove Council. I've had to buy the child weatherproof shoes, which I delegated to my mother, which is handy. So it's been busy.
Wow.
How are you, Michael?
I'm okay. I've had a very productive week, actually. Like, I got enough designs through for my new happiness app that I was able to do make a lot of progress on the main view of it, which actually went really smoothly, and the new Apple frameworks all seemed to start working for me. And I also, I just had this moment where I thought, I wanted this scroll view to start from the bottom, and there's no way to do it with the new frameworks. And it was like, am I just going to have to do some really awkward mixture of some old stuff and some new stuff, and it's going to be really complicated, and there's going to be loads of bugs, and it's going to be a real pain in the bum. And then I thought, I could probably just rotate everything around 180 degrees and it would work just fine. So I tried that, and it actually worked perfectly. And I just felt like I just got 2 weeks of my life back. Right, so it was like first thing last Friday morning, I was just like, oh, I could just take the week off just from that little idea. And then I did a YouTube video this week where I got out my Amiga and listened through to some embarrassing music I made 25 years ago, and made a little video of that. And it's just me reacting and tinkering, and it seems to be going down really well with random people. So this is good. But yeah, yesterday I just had a bit of and I've been designing a circuit board for my product thing. But yeah, I just had a bit of a crash yesterday. I'm worried I'm sort of already hit another burnout. But I did notice, like, with all that, like, because I'd sort of I had such a productive day on Friday, like getting so many features done on this app just in a day of development, that I think it had like overclocked my brain a bit, and then it just makes me sort of really impatient with everyone. And it like lasted for the rest of the weekend. Like anytime someone didn't immediately understand what I was saying, or immediately like, I was just being really like sort of snappy with people, and I was like, yes, it's weird.
Did you go and see your niece?
I did. I went and saw my little niece. Yeah, that was a while ago actually. Yeah, she was. She's a little bundle, a little kind of solid little package of human. A lot of big loud farts actually. There was a lot of rumbling. This baby rumbling in my hands.
How old is she?
Like 6 weeks.
Yeah, it's amazing what a tiny body like that can produce. Which reminds me handily that off the back of you mentioning that you were reading Gut, I was like, oh, good, yeah. Gut. I downloaded that to the Kindle and read it, yeah. Which I must earmark for a conversation about Amazon and Kindles, and anyway, that's separate. But I agree with you. It's a very interesting book, and I learned things.
But my only complaint is there's like 4 main things I learned. All the different kinds of poo. That was an interesting chapter. The way, like the posture of the toilet.
Yeah, interesting, practical.
But the thing I was disappointed about was there was like, sorry, this is getting a bit scatological, but I was very disappointed there was like a sentence on farts in the whole book. I was like, finally get some answers. And it was like, no. It was just like, yeah, it's normal. Shut up. I'm like, okay, fine, thanks.
I like the style in which it was written, because I could actually tell a 4-year-old and a 45-year-old. I could say, I just read this bit, and I didn't really have to modify the language particularly, because I think she's really nailed the explaining science to in a lay way.
Yeah, as well as sort of like wrapping it up with enough fluffiness to overcome the people's aversion to talking about that subject matter.
Yeah. I read another Gut book after I was inspired.
Oh, really?
I was just like, oh, because the thing that I missed in the Gut book. So I found it interesting, all the description of the sort of this antibacterial approach to life that we have, and this idea of cleanliness actually being negative. And I must say, because my late grandpa was a pharmacist, or I think, but he was a scientist essentially. He was like, he would talk about not drying your washing up with a tea towel, and in her book she said you might as well lick your plates and put them in the cupboard. So it's like, I was just reading it. It was because on the subject of what's the word, confirmation bias. I was like reading a book going, oh yes, that's what I do. So I enjoyed as well her descriptions of that sort of aspect of because a lot of the things we're doing that are killing the environment aren't good for us either, like overwashing clothes and over cleaning everything and killing everything. It's just not necessary.
Well, the sort of like antibiotics in animal feed or whatever it is. Where they're just like, that's the absolute killer, isn't it? Like,
absolutely.
Let's fill everything with antibiotics to just in a short-term bid to increase your yield and screw the consequences. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical companies aren't really motivated to come up with new antibiotics, and it's like, oh my God, this needs to change.
That's absolutely one of the things I've long before one of the things I have no qualms about discussing with people when they talk about, organic. The fact that even in reducing meat, for a long time I've been buying organic meat or organically farmed dairy and stuff, and I've had no qualms for a long time talking about the fact, look, forget everything else, the antibiotic use is something we need to be scared of. So anyway, I enjoyed that book. Good call. Thank you, Michael Forrest.
When I mentioned it, I thought you weren't even I seem to remember you going well, I didn't realise that I'd piqued your interest.
I had nothing to say on the subject, so then I was like, oh, you're reading a book called Gut. Okay. I think I might need to do something about that. The fact that I I think it's a family trait. Somebody says something to you, and because you've got, I'm not very good at that sort of, or I don't make an effort. I don't know what it is, and of that. So you say something, and you're not sure what my response was, and I should have said, "Oh, that sounds interesting." You know what I mean? That might have helped a conversation happen. I'm always getting reprimanded for this by my husband. It's like, do you have anything to say on this? I've just said something. What did I do? I was like, I don't know what I think. What do you want me to say? Yes. Ack.
Well, this morning I learnt how to say I did not know that in Italian, but there's no point memorising that, is there? Because I would never admit it. So we're going to talk about where everything came from.
What I've learnt this week from my Osborne book, flat book.
Yeah.
I bought this book that a friend of mine recommended, and my daughter and I sat down and looked at it, and it was, it is interesting, and it does explain it, because the nice thing about those flat books they have for science, which I highly recommend for everybody, because we've got a germ one and a body works one and all this, is that there's layers of flaps. So the book actually grows quite well with the child. So you've got the superficial information, and then you've got more and more depth as you're interested. And I said to her, oh, one of my friends who's got a little girl who's bigger than you he said that this book was good, and we were reading it, and she went, "He's a clever clogs." It's like, that was her affirmation on the book. But what I learned from the book is that everything came from a speck so small that you can't even see it.
Right.
That's what we learned.
There you go.
And it's like so small, the speck, and then it grew to golf ball, and then it grew into everything.
Yeah. And that's all you need to know. So yeah, like it started off as energy, and then the energy started turning into matter and antimatter, and then there was a teeny bit more matter. So matter ended up dominating the physical universe as we know it. And within the first few seconds, things started to form, and then it just has been expanding ever since. At unimaginable speed and scale.
It's mad, isn't it?
Do you know about matter and antimatter?
No, go on, tell me.
So, do you know, energy, Einstein's equals mc squared means matter is energy. And the speed of light is a dominant force in it's kind of, the speed of light is time, I think, in that equation. The speed of light is... information is just like when stuff happens, so you can turn energy into matter and vice versa, but there's such a thing as antimatter as well, and when matter meets antimatter they annihilate each other. And it just turns back into energy. And this is energy as in actual energy, not as in your chakra. This is the science version. It just expands, and then like these things, it turns into stars and galaxies and stars and all these things, and then every single type of atom was formed in the molten core of a sun, because it's really hard to. So atoms. What do you know about atoms?
I know that there's. What do you mean? Oh.
I lifted my watch.
Hey Siri, what do you know about atoms?
An atom is the smallest constituent unit of an ordinary matter that constitutes a chemical element. Every solid, liquid, gas and plasma is composed of So
the atoms I can do from atoms. I was thinking about this in terms of like my electronic engineering degree. I sort of feel like for my electronics, I did from the wall socket out a lot.
Right.
And in the concept of the origin of the universe, I've done from atoms onwards. I'm pretty, I covered that. It's there was fog in the previous bit because I never really got. I don't think I was interested. To remember, I might have memorised a question.
Well, if you know the periodic table,
I do.
is all the different
I'm familiar
elements
with
that
it.
exist, and there's just like so in the tiny centre of atoms, you've got protons and neutrons, and then you've got electrons orbiting them, and then there's positrons in antimatter. But basically, to make every single different type of thing, every different element, you're just like adding protons and neutrons, and they're getting bigger and bigger, and there's certain like ways that the electrons interact that means that some things on one end are like inert gases and some things are metals and some things are really interesting like carbon and silicon. But it all kind of comes down to how many protons and neutrons you've got in your atom and what that can then like bond with into molecules. But those atoms all have to be made by basically you start off with a hydrogen atom is just a proton. A hydrogen ion is just a proton. And then if you've got an electron, it's just a hydrogen atom. But in order to make any type of material that everything is made of, you need these massive nuclear fusion reactions inside stars to sort of super compress these materials, and you gradually get larger and larger, heavier and heavier elements, and then you sort of start to see different sorts of structures appear until you sort of end up with planets and people. Which
is all that what it did remind me of, because I've often said that the thinking about the size of the universe freaked me out when I was little, and I never really dedicated much brain space to thinking about it. And then in thinking about this again, I was reminded of that. I'm sure we discussed this. That sort of how do you explain consciousness? When if everything is atoms jiggling about in different configurations and with different weights and different protons and neutrons and electrons and all this, how do you explain consciousness? And I think that's what, when it comes to the science of the origin of the universe, the physics, that's where I think understanding it too much, I don't feel like it necessarily helps me in a day-to-day sort of.
No, it won't. But what it is all consistent with, like, what all physics is interested in generally is how energy, like, transfers and flows and dissipates, and so all of this. Basically, all of this chaos that has emerged from the universe being slightly inconsistent at the very, very, very start that has resulted in all these things. Basically, you've sort of ended up with this like energy. Things are a bit wonky, and it's basically just trying to turn back into an even distribution of energy and like just the heat death of the universe. Basically, we're just trying to get back to. It's just trying to get itself back down to everything being uniform.
Right.
So whether that's by just slow decay and energy being dissipated and matter slowly sort of like will eventually. I'm not sure how that. I did watch this video which was like I mean we have talked about this, but I did watch this one that sort of did like the heat death of the universe relative to where we are, and like how long that is going to be as the black holes kind of collapse and collapse and collapse, and you just end up with a kind of, I think you just end up with a cloud of a very, very, very thin cloud of hydrogen ions again, or hydrogen things again, and like all the energy is equal, and so everything that happens in between, you end up with these concentrations of energy that can be released, and the universe finds a way to release it.
That universe.
It's about like working from first principles, and it is a Western way of doing science. Is like if we can just break things down to their smallest and smallest components, and that constitutes an understanding. But it's almost, by fixating so much on that, it is a very powerful thing to do. Like you do learn an awful lot, and it has enabled most of the crazy inventions and technologies we have now. This kind of like deep pursuit of that type of science, but it does miss the the holistic level. It does miss like but what about the stuff? What about the stuff that actually happens? Like, yeah, you can sort of say, well, yeah, and then you just extrapolate from energy flow into debates about immigrants. Like, there's a lot of steps in between. And yeah, I guess science can explain that, given enough computing power.
Yeah.
But then does that really help at that point? Like, does it help that we started from first principles at that point? Sometimes it's a way of looking at things.
It is a way of looking at things, and perhaps it's quite a grounded. It's a grounding way of looking at things in some ways, because I am now going to hijack a phrase and use it differently, but it's like that sort of keeping things present in a weird way. It's like understanding things in small bits also helps you not get freaked out.
I wonder how it was before time was here, before the latest Big Bang made everything appear. I wonder how it was before up and down, when yesterday couldn't be. Nothing can change inside a singularity. I wonder how it went with no celestial sphere, when everything was one and nothing was really here. Nothing at all. No space to move, no time to grow. Nowhere to fall. No way to turn, no way to get on. I wonder what I had before you came into my life. I bet it wasn't any good. I bet it wasn't very nice. I'd been between the worlds before you spoke to me. I doubt I was alive. I wasn't anything at all. Nothing at all. I spent my hours here alone. Now I can't fall. With you I know I have it all. I'm thinking about like the creationist worldview, let's say. Let's imagine what they're thinking as they're hearing us talking about the origin of the universe. When we talk about the Big Bang, and when we talk about the universe starting off as a tiny little speck, we've seen that. Right? We've looked at that. These are things we've observed, right?
Yeah.
And an analogy I've been sort of thinking about is it's like the sort of the creationist worldview of everything came into existence 6,000 years ago, and dinosaurs were planted as a test of our faith, and like all that nonsense, frankly. Like, no, we've looked out, and we've seen this. These are just our observations, and we've looked under microscopes, and we've looked at, but because it's not necessarily an intuitive observation, it's not necessarily something you can go, look, here is a photograph that shows you that immediately. No, you need to know about how waves interfere with each other to understand that what we're looking at is the structure of a metal lattice. Like but it's sort of like to deny science's observations of those sorts of things. It's sort of like going, I believe everything's blurry. And someone going, well, have you tried glasses? And then you'd be able to see stuff that's far away and going, no, I just believe that things that are far away are blurry. And that's my worldview, and I'm going to work back from that kind of thing. So it's like,
I think this worldview, because that was when I tweeted the whole, send science help to explain to a 4-year-old where everything came from. The very first response I got was, this is rather a worldview question, not necessarily science, in my humble opinion. And it's like this idea of, first of all, my question was not a worldview question. It was a science question. Yeah. And, thank God for people who specialise in explaining science to small children. But this worldview phrase, which seems to excuse a lot of things, is or be used as a that I understand, but my worldview is this. It seems I'm cool with you having whatever worldview you want, as long as it doesn't fuck my worldview or my world. Because if you're, and that goes for the same for like your belief, this sort of selective use of science, like, I will drive a car and I'll wear glasses, but I won't vaccinate my child, or I'll use my, that it's like, you can at home, things that are to do with your house, if your worldview is to not clean your house or to clean your house or whatever it is, that's you, that's your house, but it doesn't spill into my house. But all of this worldview thing is not an excuse to affect other people's worldviews, I think.
It's one thing to go, okay, yeah, there's some stuff that I don't understand, but I will do my best to sort of understand the simplified version of what the people that do understand stuff, that do understand what they're looking at through a telescope, that do understand what they're looking for when they're looking at background radiation, are actually seeing. I can't really intuitively understand that because I haven't studied it, but I'm not going to think that my ideas are
better.
Like, how can I? Right, because there is a truth, right? There is such a thing as truth, and whether or not that's directly accessible to us, and science evolves, theories evolve, and we get arguably closer to the truth. But there's a rigor and there's a practice to it, and there's a lot of learning that needs to go into understanding a lot of this stuff, that it's very deluded to think that you can just believe some simplified anthropomorphized version of things that is the truth and that's going to be fine.
Well, I think if we take the creationist view, and the view that the things that are explained by magic, and we have spoken about this before. It's like, as we've evolved our knowledge, we are less reliant on the magical explanations to things. I think as humans, we want explanations to things, even if it's like, why has that happened to me? And sometimes there is no answer. But the more we want an answer. And what's happened, I think, so before, the priest would say, this is what happens, and if you don't believe it, you're going to go to hell, and whatever. And we for many hundreds and thousands of years bought that sort of information passed down to us by people who were also making it up.
Argument from authority.
An authority argument. And I think we are absolutely 100% right to question authority. Yeah. But not when it's authoritative knowledge. Do you know, like, if your authority is based on power, then I challenge you. But if your authority is based on the fact that you are a cancer specialist and I am not, or you are a physicist and I am not, then, I'll ask you lots of questions and in a hope that I will gain a better understanding. But I can't absorb 10 years of study or 20 years of expertise. I can't do that.
And a good scientist would never say, you have to believe what I'm saying because I'm a scientist.
No.
They would say, here is my research, and I've
Yeah.
looked at this data and found this thing, and when I did this thing, this surprising thing came out of it, and hundreds of other people have now tried the same thing, even though they didn't believe it to start with, and we all found this crazy thing out, and then we invented transistors, and then we invented... That's what a scientist doesn't go, no...
Because I said so.
Because I said so.
Yeah.
And anyone that does, and even though some of them try... there's a lot of egos involved. There's a lot of infighting. There's a lot of like sticking to your guns, even in the face of opposing evidence. But ultimately, it's human knowledge. Like science is our human knowledge, and it's a collaboration between thousands of scientists, millions of people, just all kind of hammering away at these very, very difficult problems that are very increasingly specialised. And the reason that I'm not a scientist is because there's no glory in it anymore because it's also specialised, you know? I
mean, I certainly at school had, you have science teachers who are very, very good at explaining things and science teachers who aren't and don't know it very well and just say, don't ask questions, just, accept and reproduce, especially, in a Yugoslav education system, it was very much learn and regurgitate. And you have, a bad teacher can put you off, but that doesn't mean that the whole area of science is wrong. And I think that was what was quite interesting, both in the gut book and I've listened to another episode of that podcast, the same guy that did the parenting thing. And this one was about that time restricted eating. And he was talking to like the world's specialist and the guy who discovered it all and stumbled upon it in his research. But he was incredibly humble. He was like, this is what we found so far. And of course, we can't say definitively because we've only done the mouse study and we've done this bit of the human study, but not that bit of the human study. But it's like, based on what I know today, this is what I can tell you from the data. And I think that sort of magical explanations of things that's what they lack.
Yeah, and also, like, they're never finished. Like the sort of religious approach to things is like, and now we have the answer. It is known. Like like, I'm not going to think about this anymore, which is, I guess, comfortable in some ways, but that's the opposite of what scientists do. They know that, okay, we've got this far in this problem and there's these areas that we don't know anything about, and they're sort of constantly like pushing out into the unknown areas, the bits that haven't had any brain power applied to them yet or any research, or like, how do we get a more accurate, we need a bigger super collider to really like smash these atoms down to their smaller and smaller parts. They're always like looking forwards to the next thing and like trying to figure out, okay, I think if we try this, we might learn a bit more. Which is sort of, they're not putting the brakes on and going, no, we know enough now. It's over.
But I think that's one of the things that does science a disservice, or maybe that's not, and that's one of the things. But so recently, the example I'm going to use is recently, because of all this gut study that's happened, and that's very relatively new science. And it talks about, the fact that there are some cells in your gut that are brain cells essentially, and there's all this sort of things they're finding out, and the people using the magical explanations go, ha, see, we've been telling them for centuries that you've got a stomach chakra, and it's like, first of all, the science isn't necessarily in conflict with your concept of your own well-being, number one. And secondly, because science has discovered an explanation for a thing, doesn't mean that, I think it's this idea of right forever. And because new discovery explains something old or even disproves something that we held as a truth for a period of time, doesn't mean that science is wrong or that you shouldn't be accepting of the current or latest science. Just like, it's the way science just communicates new discoveries in some way undermines itself. Because I think if you have a science brain, you're like, oh, brilliant, I didn't realise that. Whereas if you're just barely, you're coping with life and holding some form of truth that gives you comfort, and then somebody swoops in and goes, nah. I think that is psychologically quite freaky, and so that's why people get the hump with science.
Well, yeah, there's a human desire for meaning, but it's not. It's not that big a part. It's like maybe 10% of your, and then realizing that suddenly being faced with the idea that you can't contain that understanding in that little 10% if you're actually serious about it, and you're going to have to basically make some leaps of faith that maybe seem counterintuitive or trust some stuff that is all very scary and alien to you, when someone else is kind of giving you this simple finished explanation that you then know that's done and dusted, and I don't have to think about that anymore. Yeah. And if only everyone else would see it the same way, we wouldn't be wasting all this time on all this science that scares me. Like, we have a need for it, but we also don't have an infinite need for it.
No.
Well, some of us do, but like most people, life is complicated enough without having to worry about where everything came from.
I was talking to my sister yesterday about the fact that there is no constant, and my brother's getting a bit stressed at work about something, and we were talking about change, and he's implementing a change and getting loads of grief at work, and he's like, I understand that change is part of life. I've had enough change in my life. I'm comfortable. I know this is what it is. I mean, he's not coping very well with the pressure, but he's like, I don't, it's very difficult if you're somebody who's like, yeah, it's changing, but that's welcome to life. And then you've got people going, but cling. And then Lydia and I were talking about it in the context of, the fact that as humans, like, we are work in progress, and this holding on to truths and beliefs is so damaging and frustrating for you. I don't understand how you can, it must take an awful lot of energy to fight changing your mind or learning something new.
Yeah, at a certain point, like, it becomes, like, you have to realise that
it's like,
this torrent is not going to slow down, guys. This is going to keep coming, and it's not always good. It's not always nice. Sometimes you lose a planet. You're like, Pluto.
Yeah.
When I learned, astronomy, when I learned physics, Pluto was still a planet.
Yeah,
it's not. It's like, oh no, we realise.
I did actually say that to my daughter looking at this book, and I said, well, when I was at school, we used to have another planet. But so I was like, but yes, sometimes you lose a planet. It's disconcerting. It's like, how could we for so long, or in my school book, it said very clearly that there was, Pluto was a planet, and now it isn't. Well, how could they be wrong about something so major as a whole planet? That is quite freaky, I think.
Yes.
And then
it's very far away, to be fair. Also, I think you're just making me think, like, we do put a lot of stock in stuff that we've seen printed in a book, don't we?
Oh gosh, yes.
And whether it's a Bible or a school book, right, science book, it's like, once you've seen that printed in a book, it's very hard to think, maybe that's not right. Maybe that's kind of one of the reasons everything's in such chaos, is now that more and more stuff is in a more ephemeral. Wikipedia could just change at any moment. Yeah, well, it could always just change at any moment, but now it's sort of happening in real time.
Yeah. But it is weird that you learn things in school that aren't true anymore.
Looking at the high street, I'm gonna go down, and I kinda spend it up above me, and I'm not gonna everything I was trying to recognize and sound.
The other thing that I think science does to undermine itself is allow annoying, stupid headlines to be printed. Latest study says coffee is good for you. Latest study says coffee is bad for you. Latest study says chocolate, you should eat chocolate. Latest study says you shouldn't eat. And it's like a journalist looking for a headline, looking for some click, picking on one line in a study with no scientific depth. Oh, so it might
context.
Be no
the
context.
The main problem is the lack of context. Here are the other papers. Here are the other things in this field. Here's where it actually lives in the canon of scientific knowledge. No, you don't do that. You go, here's a story.
Yeah, and so when you're trying to then persuade an elderly family member that a particular thing is not good, they go, oh, well, they're always changing their mind. It was good last week and it'll be good next week again, and this week it's bad. And you're like, no, this has always been bad. You've just been reading silly headlines. So I think that doesn't help us when in that sort of having the respect for that canon of knowledge and that depth of sort of human understanding. It's like,
yeah, and maybe the problem is that science doesn't lend itself very well to stories. Like the sorts of stories it lends itself to are very reductive and sort of misleading, and so that press does tend to be the way we learn stuff, the way we remember stuff is by turning it into the narrative. That's how our brain does data compression. Science sort of doesn't let you do that very easily. It's sort of you can get a few stories from how the scientists, and this is what I always wish there was more of in my undergraduate physics degree, was like, I really like the first lecture where it was all the stories of the people and all the people and how they kind of figured this stuff out. But as soon as it sort of turned into here are the details of it, there's no way to compress that into your brain. It just has to take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Unlike a kind of story which is coffee is bad. Okay, no, that's not what it actually is. And to compress it into that is to destroy it, is to make it false.
What I was going to bring up is scientists who are Christians or heavily religious. And I think that's quite an interesting... It's like that climate scientist woman that I like who is a Christian and the way she in her head can be both of those things. And I think this is where this is what I was going back to what I was saying earlier about worldviews. I think I understand how you could use faith to be part of your existence but not affect your view of the world. Do you know, like, so she uses it in the context of, we must protect God's creation. We must love all of God's people and all of God's children because that's her belief system. But she's a hugely renowned scientist who always quotes data when she's making a scientific point. To her, those concepts aren't in conflict. And I can kind of understand how if you've been brought up with the beautiful stories of God and everything that making you feel happy and good, then why would you want to let those stories go?
Okay, listen, like I was going to say, like this, I mean, and this is the same thing I was going to kind of bring up, was that some scientists are religious. I would say heavily religious is not
maybe that was
the right is a bad way to describe those people, because what they have to do is find a way to reconcile the idea of a sort of guiding force behind the creation of our world and our universe that is going to have to go way beyond what the book is going to tell them. Like they're going to have to sort of think outside it. And so the question you ask is, we started from a singularity. Okay, well, where did that come from? Yeah. Like, then that tends to be where, like, the scientists that still have a bit of religion going will kind of put God. They'll be like, okay, well, we may be looking at this thing happening. That's how God made the universe, but it doesn't mean, we don't know. We don't know what was before that, because that was when time started. Yeah. Like, for me, the reason that the sort of the sort of scientists' Christianity, for example, is a bit sort of pointless is like, on the one hand, it's like, okay, there is a limit to our knowledge, yes. And because it makes no difference, I might as well put some sort of conscious deity there that's kind of maybe got a plan for stuff. My problem with it is like, it's so far away from anything that can affect me at that point. Like, okay, well, maybe I'll get a better break in the next universe in, you know, another 100 billion years. Maybe another version of me will do better. Like, because the whole point of religion, the whole point of that type of understanding of the world is that you pray to this being and he's going to sort out that you got no money at the moment. Like, that is going to, that's why people need that. They need something that's they can feel like it's going to actually affect them here and now, day to day. And I think that's a different type of belief and faith than, we don't really know, like there are limits to human knowledge, and beyond that, like kind of anything goes. And I take a bit of comfort from the idea that maybe, you know, there's someone designed these rules, and the rules that were set up at the dawn of time. The reason there was a slight like imbalance of energy and matter and antimatter is because God kind of put it that way in order to create us. Maybe we're the same sorts of things, but I sort of feel like if that deity can't in any real way intervene, then it's moot to me. Like, I don't really see the point of having that belief.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think because there's other kinds of sort of, not creationist, I'm not going to say that, because I've been deliberately using the word magic throughout this podcast. Yeah. And it's kind of that the sort of magic to me is a word that is interchangeable with the unexplainable. So it might be unexplainable by me right now, or, you know, like when people... I know we know a lot about the confirmation bias and all that kind of thing. I was just thinking of you when you phoned me, but I probably thought of you 150 other times and you didn't phone me, but those weren't noteworthy. All that, I'm aware of all those things. But I think there's my worldview is that we are all connected in some way, whether that's via some sort of magical fairy dust or just because we're humans and we occupy the same space. Doesn't really matter to me, but I feel like, you know, I take comfort from thinking about the bonds I have with my different friends, and I have, you know, like, and I think for me, you know, sometimes feeling like you're connected to somebody who's not physically there and you're not really talking to you, but you're thinking of them, is a nice, reassuring feeling. And if I do that sort of first principles reduction, that I'm just a bunch of jiggling atoms and so are they, frankly, there's no but then maybe we are really connected.
Science doesn't reduce it. Science still says it's a vastly more complex jiggling than we could ever hope to understand in our pathetic little brains. And therefore, actually, you know, the act of praying is not going to have a causal relationship because some force, some magic power made the world different because you asked it to. It's going to happen because you've focused some energy on looking for this thing, and then you've spotted an opportunity subconsciously. It's that you wouldn't have spotted if you hadn't like devoted 5 minutes before going to sleep to thinking about what you really want right now. Because and that is one of the biggest losses of the sort of, you know, the non-religious existence is like, well, you're not really thinking about that sort of thing because you don't really, what's the point? Like, it's all just chaos. It's all just completely random. It's not completely random just because it's just because it's very, very complicated and very like impossible to understand doesn't mean it's completely random. No, there are weird little ebbs and flows and you know, like
and I think
connections.
I think that I hope I haven't described all this on podcast before, but when my father was brought up really strictly Catholic, and he was quite adamant when we went to Yugoslavia that we wouldn't be going to church because he didn't want us all freaked out, was his view of Catholicism. But what he did, so he didn't bring us up as religious in any way. And it is on him because my mum was brought up in a communist household. But we had conversations about God and about people who believed in God and about the different explanations and the fact that, you know, like, you know, who this sort of, this idea, I think, in his own words, he's talking about what you just described and what I was talking about. It's a kind of like, you can accept that there's lots of things you can't explain. Yeah. And that doesn't prove or disprove God. Like, not everything can be proven, and you can just be comfortable sitting in this world where, man, who knows what the explanation is. If you want to attach a deity to it, go for it. But again, I think it's about not affecting my physical safety with your worldview. That's where I get all kind of, me thinking that spending a minute thinking about my friend who's having a troubled time, or you send a message going, I've been thinking of you, I'm sending positive vibes, whatever. I'm very up for doing all of that. That doesn't really change somebody else's access to healthcare.
But what I would say is that where it does cause a problem is, like, I met my godparents, like my godmother, after not seeing her for like 25 years or whatever, like a few years back, and she was like, "Oh, I prayed for you a lot. I prayed for you every day." I'm like, so you thought you were doing something and you weren't doing anything that in any way affected me. And it's like, you think you've done something and you haven't done anything. So that is like, you could have sent me a message and then that would have actually affected me.
Mine's accompanied with an actual message.
Exactly. And to me, that's why I wanted to highlight that there's a very big difference between I'm praying for someone and they don't know about it and you don't see them, right? Like, what's that? You're just... What are you doing? That's nothing.
That's interesting, yeah. But spending a moment praying for how could I help this person might have actually resulted in some action.
Even if I just had some way of knowing that someone was thinking about me, that would have been nice.
Yeah.
But no, you think God's going to tell me somehow. No.
God, no, I did get a message.
That. Yeah. Do you not notice that it doesn't work like that?
Yeah.
We do want explanations for everything. Yeah. And when we don't have an explanation for something, it's kind of plays on our mind. Yeah. Like I'm sure you can remember something that was never explained, that was weird, that happened, but you remember it because it's not explained. And if you can just go, oh yeah, it was just God doing stuff, then it just frees up your brain for other stuff.
To not worry about it.
Shuts that down. So obviously it's got a massive appeal, but I also think like everything is connected.
Yeah.
So anyone like not holding up their end is going to cause problems for the rest of us. Yeah. So it's not. I don't think it's as simple as like, as long as they're not hurting me, like they can think what they think. The fact that they're kind of doing that is sort of like a poison slowly coming. I mean, that's kind of rude to religious people, but it is like, it's ultimately, if you're refusing to engage with reality in a meaningful way, then there can't be consequences for everyone. And the more people that do that, the more you get, bacteria.
The more you get, I get it.
Antibiotics resistant, people not vaccinating, all that kind of thing. It has consequences. And people do, our school system does insist on, thankfully, we do have systems that insist on teaching children science. Yeah.
For now.
So far. And they seem to be like holding up. But yeah, what religious people may object to is the fact that it does leave a lot of gaps when you look at it that way.
It does. I told you about that Jehovah's Witness I used to work with. Yes. It was like, I spent ages Googling, and it turns out that they might have been lying to me, my church. That doesn't mean that you can't have faith, my friend. But I think it's I hadn't thought about what you said.
Faith is a wonderful thing, like for just being able to get on with your life. Just being able to, like, it's really hard to, this is the depression of, like, the thing that kind of like weighs on me is like, I don't know what's going to work, what I do is going to work. I don't have any way to control that. If I could pray for it, at least I might feel like I was like blowing on the dice or something, like doing something towards making the kind of wider world kind of like accept what I'm doing. But like, because I have this rationalist outlook, it's very hard to. It just makes a whole class of things very much more scary.
But I think that's what you're. Yeah, I think. But I think that's it's passive versus active. A lot of faith and belief, and and words like hope. They don't require you to do anything or change anything. You sit where you are and you do what you do, and you have faith that things will get better, or that you'll pray for things to get better. But actually, if you want the world to be a better place, you have to make it a better place. You have to make things okay. And I think that's one of the things I was talking with that journalist that I spoke to recently, and he asked me, he said, I was a bit left field, but he was like, you were saying that it was a bit random that he caught you on that day with the tweet, and the next day you were going to be in hospital with an anaesthetic, and it was like, because that whole Trump tweet, if it had happened any other day, I probably wouldn't have been able to do anything. And he was like, well, do you think that was like the universe? He said, I don't know how spiritual you are, what sort of person you are, what your religious beliefs are, but do you think it was like some other power? And I was like, I haven't thought about it. I'd never thought about it in those terms at all. What I do think, though, and I still think, even though I've had a bit longer to think about it, the answer is that actually it's not about how or why it happened. It's about what you're going to do.
It's about how you react.
And it's how you react. And it's like...
But I think, what I'd like to see is an alternative, and maybe this is kind of a way it's going. It's like, it almost is like, yeah, well, that happened. I'll just make something up that helps me kind of like think, oh, yeah, I've just got this gremlin that comes out. He's called Steve, and he sometimes makes stuff come together. And the advantage of that is that it's not attached to a load of like homophobic, misogynist stuff boring stuff, or like that is sort of like has sort of parasitically attached itself to some good ideas that help people kind of feel a bit of confidence in their position in the universe. It's like, at least if it's you just know you've kind of made it up, it's fine.
In this whole conversation and faith and worldview and all these things, my daughter is very well aware that people die, because my dad's not there, and we've always said he died. And so then explaining what that means, and then she talks about, it must be, she'll say things like, I wouldn't like that person to die because I wouldn't be able to talk to them anymore. And I was like, you can still talk to them. They just can't answer. Like, you can still, this kind of, I'm very happy with giving her these. I've never said anything about heaven or hell or another space or another area, but I've spoken about it in the terms of like, once you know somebody, they're there in your brain, and you can talk to them as much as you like. And so I think, there are like, you can still comfort yourself and have a comforting worldview, and I don't think it needs to have. I personally am not sure you need to have faith in a being, but Steve the Gremlin sounds like a laugh.
I mean, the long and short of it is, if you keep asking why, of course we don't know. But what we can see so far is Big Bang, universe expanding, acceleration, atoms, all different kinds, sizes. Atoms are made of stuff that's smaller as well, and like you can look at it and realise that some of those things that look different are actually sort of the same sort of thing, just in a slightly different mode, and like we're putting a lot of energy into, well, a lot of effort into kind of building these larger and larger super gliders and reactors and things to try and figure things out. But what we know is that there's some forces that attract, there's some forces that repel, well, both retract and repel. There's some very, very strong ones that can make atoms come together, and then there's some slightly weaker ones that can let atoms decay. And matter is energy, and that's bound together with the concept of simultaneity in time and the speed of light. And it's all just kind of like the fact it's all basically kind of one thing, matter and energy. Doesn't really help you, you know, in the post office, but like actually it's quite, like, in terms of an elegant understanding of the core of what everything is, it's quite nice to kind of realize that it's in some ways very simple. And if you just think about the origins and the start and the smallest building blocks, which is kind of the spirit of this episode, then there's probably not too much to it. But it's when you start looking at how things interact with each other.
That's when your head starts hurting.
We are nowhere. Science is nowhere. Like, so, you know.
Very good. The other thing that we've concluded is that if you're thinking of your friend, send them a message.
Yeah, maybe just
let them know you're thinking of them.
Just tell them. Listening. If you like the podcast, go to grandpodcast.com. There's a subscription button, or just do it in the app you're in if you're in an app. Where can people find you?
People can find me at Ivanka on Twitter, and also doing Instagram at grandpodcast.
And Ivanka.blog.
Oh yeah, and Ivanka.blog.
Early episodes.
I gave up saying that for like a long time ago, because I was like, I just haven't written anything on there for ages. For about 100 episodes, I haven't written anything on there. And I might have been a Trumpiversary one, but anyway, go. Yes.
Maybe. I'm at michaelforrestmusic.com, and come and check out my YouTube channel.
I realised Grand Podcast wasn't following you on
Well, that's my MF Music one. Yeah, I noticed I got the follow last. Finally. We've also got, what else?
What else we got? What we would really be grateful for is some ratings and reviews and some sharing. A few likes on Instagram, that's always handy for the algorithms. A bit of, you know, Facebook likes, that sort of business that makes people go, oh, what's this thing that's getting so much attention on the internet? And then they might have a little listen. You can also tell people about our podcast, and, you know, I don't know what you'd say to them, but you could go with, you know, it's a pub chat but recorded on a Friday morning. with no alcohol.
Yeah, but you have to tell them what the people are like, don't you?
Yeah,
So,
really nice.
I wouldn't like to say really nice. Very nice.
Very nice people.
Very nice people. And we're so yeah, that's a thing. Help us with the algorithms, and also it is possible to support us if you're a fancy pants on patreon.com/grandpodcast if you want. That's possible. All the notes, all the links are down below. I finally put the mug link in our links down below. That wasn't up there.
Handsome
mug. So you can buy a mug if you want.
I might Instagram our mug.
Yeah, do it.
That'll be our Instagram content for today.
All right, well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.